Alarms are screaming in my ears before I even open my eyes. Red light floods the small comms booth where I sleep during long shifts, and the floor is shaking under me like the whole station wants to tear itself apart. I am Vesa Iolan, 3rd Comms Officer on Mining Outpost Kelvin R9, and in this moment, I am absolutely certain I am about to die. 3 raider ships have dropped out of hidden space right on top of us. I can hear Captain Doran Ashcombe shouting orders through the corridor speakers, telling engineering to reroute power to the outer shields, telling weapons control to fire back, even though we barely have any weapons worth firing. Kelvin R9 is a mining post. We pull rare minerals out of asteroid fields. We are not built for a fight. We are built for drilling rock and shipping it out on slow cargo runs. My hands will not stop shaking as I slide into my chair and pull up the emergency channel list. There is a proper procedure for this. Every station has one. If hostile ships are detected, the comms officer sends a coded distress signal to the nearest regional patrol fleet, 3 systems away, and then everyone prays the patrol arrives before the raiders finish looting the cargo bays and start looting the people. I punch in the sequence I memorized during training. My fingers are cold and clumsy, and the console keeps flashing warnings about power fluctuations from the raider ships firing on our outer hull. I am trying to move fast, faster than I have ever moved in my life, and that is exactly when I make my mistake. There is an old panel built into the comms array, tucked behind 3 layers of interface menus that nobody on this station has touched in years. It was installed long before I was born, back when Kelvin R9 was first constructed. Back when the people who built this outpost apparently had some kind of arrangement with another race entirely. Nobody talks about it. Nobody uses it. It is just old wiring that should have been stripped out decades ago but never was, because removing it costs money nobody wants to spend. In my panic, my hand catches the wrong sequence of keys. Instead of the regional patrol frequency, I trigger something buried in that old panel. A frequency I do not recognize. A code my console has never shown me before. For half a second I think I have broken the system entirely, that I have doomed us by wasting precious time on a dead channel. Then the transmission goes out anyway. I do not have time to fix my mistake. The raiders are firing again, and the whole station lurches sideways, throwing me out of my chair and onto the floor. Somewhere down the corridor, I hear someone screaming that the eastern dock has been breached. My heart is pounding so hard I can feel it in my throat. I pull myself back up, grab the edge of the console, and stare at the screen, waiting for some sign that my emergency call went anywhere at all. Captain Ashcombe bursts into the comms booth, his uniform scorched at one shoulder, his eyes wide with the kind of fear commanders are not supposed to show their crew. He asks me if the signal went out. I tell him yes, though I do not tell him it went to the wrong channel, because right now there is no time for that conversation. He nods, grips my shoulder for one steadying second, and tells me to hold the line, that help is coming, that the patrol fleet will not let a mining outpost fall. I want to believe him. I want to believe that in 3 or 4 hours, friendly ships will appear on our scopes and drive these raiders away before they take everything from us. That is the plan. That is what the training manuals promise. 3 or 4 hours of holding on, hiding, praying, while the people I have worked beside for 2 years fight for every corridor and every airlock. I do not know yet that the frequency I accidentally used was never meant for the regional patrol at all. I do not know that it was a failsafe left behind from an old agreement, a channel that was supposed to remain silent forever unless something far larger than a raider attack was happening. I do not know any of this yet. All I know is that the console in front of me, the one I assumed was dead, suddenly lights up with an incoming response. It comes back faster than should be possible. Not in hours, not even in minutes. It comes back in under 60 seconds. A burst of data so clean and so precise that my scanners briefly cannot even process where it originated from. Captain Ashcombe leans over my shoulder, staring at the screen with me. Neither of us says anything for a moment because neither of us understands what we are looking at. The regional patrol has never responded this quickly in the entire history of this outpost. Even in the best-case scenario, even if a patrol ship happened to be sitting right at the edge of our system, A response time like this should not be possible. The raiders hit us again, harder this time, and the lights flicker throughout the entire station. Somewhere below us, metal groans under stress. I grab the edge of my console to keep from falling and force myself to focus, because whatever just answered our call, I need to know what it is. The response is not words. Not yet. It is a single burst of confirmation data, an acknowledgement ping, the kind of automated reply a system sends when it has received a message and is preparing to act on it. There is no friendly voice, no comforting reassurance, just cold and immediate acknowledgement, like something enormous just opened one eye and looked directly at us. Captain Ashcombe asks me who we just contacted. I tell him honestly that I do not know. He asks me to check the frequency log, and when I pull it up, my stomach drops. It is not the coordinates for the regional patrol. It is not any frequency listed in our current operational manuals at all. It is buried under old station schematics, labeled only with a designation I do not recognize, tagged as archived, tagged as inactive, tagged as do not use, without full command authorization. I did not have command authorization. I had shaking hands and 11 seconds to make a decision, and I made the wrong one. Before either of us can decide what to do next, another raider blast rocks the station, and the lights go out completely. Emergency lighting kicks in a moment later, bathing the comms booth in dim red. Captain Ashcombe orders me to keep monitoring the channel no matter what happens, and then he is gone, running back down the corridor to coordinate what little defense we have left. I am alone now, staring at a screen that just told me something out there heard my mistake and is already responding to it. My mind keeps circling back to the same unanswered question. If that was not the regional patrol, then who did I just call for help, and how did they possibly hear me this fast? Outside the hull, I feel the station shudder again, weaker this time, as if the raiders themselves have paused. I do not know it yet, but far away, in the dark quiet between stars, something has already begun moving in response to a call I never meant to send. Something that has been sleeping in old files and forgotten protocols for longer than I have been alive. Something that is not supposed to wake up for something as small as 3 raider ships attacking a mining outpost. I grip the edge of my console and wait, terrified and confused in equal measure, with no idea that the true danger tonight is no longer the raiders outside our hull, but the sheer scale of what I have just accidentally invited into our small, desperate fight. Down the corridor, I hear Nadia Voss shouting numbers into her comms unit, calling out power levels from engineering as if reciting them fast enough might somehow keep the whole station from falling apart. Every few seconds, another tremor rolls through the floor beneath me, smaller than the last, as though the raiders themselves are hesitating, uncertain whether to press their advantage or pull back entirely. I try to raise Captain Ashcombe again on the channel, but static answers me instead, thin and broken, the kind of interference that tells me our main relay array took damage in the last exchange of fire. My only working link to the rest of the station is this old comms booth, this cramped little room with its flickering red emergency lighting and the strange archived channel still glowing faintly on my display, waiting for whatever it summoned to arrive. Milo Bennett's voice crackles through on a secondary line, asking if I am still alive, if the comms booth is still intact. I tell him yes, my own voice sounding thinner than I expect, and he tells me the eastern dock has been sealed off entirely, that whoever breached it earlier has either retreated or been contained, though nobody down there seems entirely sure which. Neither of us mentions the possibility that it could be something worse than either option, but I can hear the same fear in his voice that is sitting heavy in my own chest. I force myself to look away from the door, away from the corridor, and back to the console, because right now, this small screen is the only thing standing between me and total helplessness. Whatever I triggered by mistake is still out there, somewhere beyond our hull, and until I understand what it actually is, I cannot afford to stop watching. The raiders stop firing so suddenly that the silence feels louder than the explosions did. I sit frozen in the comms booth, staring at my sensor display, waiting for the attack to resume, but nothing happens. For almost a full minute, nothing at all happens, and that stillness scares me more than the chaos did. I open a channel to the bridge and ask if anyone can see what is happening outside. Nadia Voss, our chief engineer, answers instead of the captain, her voice tight and confused. She tells me the raider ships have stopped advancing. She tells me their engines are still active, their weapons are still charged, but they are simply sitting there, motionless, as if they are waiting for something. I do not understand why until my own sensors pick up the first distortion. Space itself seems to ripple, far beyond the raiders, out past the edge of our usual scanning range. At first I think it is a sensor malfunction caused by the earlier damage to our systems. I run a diagnostic. The diagnostic comes back clean. Whatever is causing that distortion is real, and it is approaching fast. Captain Ashcombe reaches the comms booth again, breathing hard, his uniform now torn at the sleeve. He asks me what I am seeing, and I show him the display, the strange ripple growing larger with every passing second. Neither of us has ever witnessed anything like it. Our own ships use standard drive systems, slow and steady, nothing like this smooth, silent folding of space that seems to bend light around itself as it moves. Milo Bennett, our young sensor technician, calls out from his station down the corridor, his voice cracking with something between fear and disbelief. He says the readings do not match anything in our database, not radar technology, not regional patrol technology, not anything registered by any government or trading company operating in this sector. I ask him how many contacts he is picking up. He hesitates before answering, and that hesitation tells me the number is bad before he even says it out loud. He tells me it is not one ship. It is not even 10. His scanner keeps recalculating the count as more and more distortions appear, spreading out across a wide arc of space just beyond the raider vessels. Captain Ashcombe grips the back of my chair, and I can feel the tension radiating off him. He asks me again what frequency I used to send our distress call, and this time I tell him the truth. I tell him it was not the regional patrol channel. I tell him I hit the wrong sequence in my panic, that I triggered some old archived frequency buried in the original station wiring, something none of us were ever taught to use. His face goes pale under the red emergency lighting. He asks me if I know what that old frequency actually was. I tell him no, that I only found out it existed by accident, in the middle of trying to save all our lives. He does not answer right away. He stares at the growing distortion pattern on my screen, and for the first time since the raiders attacked, I see real fear in his eyes, a different kind of fear than the one caused by weapons fire. The raider ships begin moving now, but not toward us. They are pulling back, engines flaring as they attempt to retreat entirely from the system. Whatever they are seeing on their own sensors has convinced them that looting a mining outpost is no longer worth the risk, and they are running before whatever is coming even fully arrives. I watch on my display as the first shapes begin to resolve out of the distortion. They are not small. Compared to our outpost, compared to the raider ships, compared to anything I have ever personally witnessed, they are massive, moving with a precision that looks less like a fleet and more like a single coordinated organism made of hundreds of individual parts. Milo's voice comes through the channel again, quieter now, almost reverent. He says the number has stopped climbing. He says there are over 300 vessels holding formation just outside the debris field where the raiders first attacked us. 300. For a single distress call from a mining outpost that barely rates a mention on any regional map. Nadia asks over the comms if we should try to signal them, to explain the situation, to tell them the immediate danger has already begun retreating. Captain Ashcombe does not answer immediately. He is still staring at the screen, and I realize he is doing the same math I am doing in my head, trying to understand what kind of civilization sends 300 ships in response to a single accidental transmission. One of the raider vessels, the slowest of the three, does not manage to escape in time. I watch a single beam of light lance out from the newly arrived fleet, precise and controlled, and the raider ship goes dark instantly, its engines and weapons disabled in what looks like a single coordinated strike. There is no prolonged battle. There is no drawn-out exchange of fire. There is simply a threat, and then there is no threat, handled with a speed and accuracy that leaves everyone on our bridge speechless. The other two raider ships do not even attempt to fight back. They alter course immediately, abandoning any pretense of retreat, and simply broadcasting what sounds like a surrender signal on every open frequency they can find. I have never heard raiders surrender before. Raiders do not surrender. Raiders fight until they either win or their ships are destroyed. But whatever they are seeing out there has convinced even hardened raiders that resistance is not an option worth considering. Captain Ashcombe finally speaks, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. He asks me if I am able to open a channel to the new fleet. My hands are shaking again, but for a different reason now. I run the calculations, adjust the frequency, and manage to establish a two-way connection within a few tense seconds. For a long moment, nothing comes through. I begin to wonder if the channel failed, if we are simply being ignored, while whatever is out there finishes cleaning up the raider threat. Then a voice comes through, calm and level, speaking our language with an accent I do not recognize, though the translation itself is flawless. The voice asks if Kelvinar 9 requires further assistance, or if the immediate threat has been fully neutralized. It is such a simple, almost mundane question that for a moment nobody on the bridge responds. After everything we have just witnessed, after 300 ships appeared out of nowhere and disabled a raider vessel in seconds, the voice on the other end sounds like someone checking in about a minor inconvenience rather than a life-threatening attack. Captain Ashcombe finally answers, his voice unsteady. He thanks whoever is speaking, confirms that the immediate danger appears to have passed, and then, carefully, asks who exactly we are speaking with. There is a brief pause on the other end, as if the question itself is slightly unusual. The voice identifies itself as Grace Whitfield, Fleet Coordinator, representing what it calls the Soul Defense Compact. I have never heard of the Soul Defense Compact. I have never heard the term soul used to describe anyone before. Captain Ashcombe glances at me, and I can tell from his expression that the name means nothing to him either. Grace Whitfield continues speaking, her tone still calm, still measured, as if she deals with situations like this every single day. She explains that our transmission triggered what she calls a Tier 1 emergency protocol, a designation reserved for the most severe threats recognized under an old agreement between our people and hers. She asks, almost gently, if we understand the nature of the channel we use to contact them. I feel my stomach tighten as Captain Ashcombe looks directly at me. I do not know how to answer her question, because I still do not fully understand it myself. All I know is that I made a mistake in the chaos of an attack, reaching for help through the fastest channel my shaking hands could find, and somehow that mistake reached across an unimaginable distance and brought an entire fleet to our doorstep in less time than it takes to properly evacuate a single corridor. Captain Ashcombe tells Grace Whitfield honestly that we may have misunderstood the purpose of the frequency used, that our comms officer activated it during an active attack without knowing its intended function. There is another pause on the other end, longer this time, and I brace myself for anger, for accusation, for the kind of reaction I would expect after wasting the resources of an entire fleet over what now feels like a small, almost embarrassing mistake. Instead, Grace Whitfield's voice remains steady, even faintly warm. She tells us that the protocol exists precisely for situations like this, that any station with legitimate access to the channel is entitled to use it in a genuine emergency, regardless of the eventual scale of response required. She tells us that our safety was never in question once the signal was received, and that the size of the response was simply standard procedure on their end, not something we need to apologize for. I do not fully believe her, not yet, not with 300 ships still holding position just outside our shattered outer hull, but something in her voice makes the fear in my chest ease slightly, replaced by a different feeling entirely, something closer to disbelief mixed with a strange, cautious relief. Captain Ashcombe asks if the surrendering raiders will be taken into custody, and Grace Whitfield confirms that her fleet will handle their transfer to the nearest recognized authority for processing, sparing our station the burden of managing prisoners we are entirely unequipped to hold. It is such a practical, orderly response that it feels almost jarring after the violence of the last hour. As the conversation continues, I notice something on my display that makes my breath catch. The 300 ships holding formation outside our system are not the entirety of what responded to my call. Far in the background of my sensor readout, faint and distant, more distortions are beginning to appear, smaller in scale, moving with the same eerie precision, as if additional forces are still arriving in response to a signal I sent purely by accident. Milo's voice comes through the channel again, quieter than before, almost disbelieving. He says the numbers are still climbing. He says whatever I triggered tonight was not a request for a small rescue party. It was something much larger, something that reached far beyond this single system, and it is still answering. I sit back in my chair, staring at the endless rows of distant contacts still resolving on my screen, and I begin to understand, slowly and with growing unease, that my simple mistake in the middle of a raider attack has done something no ordinary distress call ever could. I have not just called for help, I have called an entire civilization to attention, and now every single one of us on this small mining outpost is about to learn exactly what that means. Captain Ashcombe stays beside me, unwilling to leave the comms booth now that direct contact has been established. He asks Grace Whitfield how long her fleet intends to remain in our system, and she tells him that a full assessment will be conducted before any decisions are made, though she assures him that our station will not be left unprotected while the surrounding region is still being evaluated for any lingering threats connected to tonight's attack. Nadia Voss calls in from engineering, her voice steadier now than it has been all night, reporting that the tremors have finally stopped entirely and that our remaining power reserves are holding, though barely. She asks if it is safe yet to begin bringing the damaged sections back online, and Captain Ashcombe tells her to wait just a little longer until we know exactly what kind of presence is now surrounding our small, battered outpost. I glance again at the display, at the rows of enormous shapes still holding formation in the dark beyond our hull, and I feel a strange mixture of relief and disbelief settle over me. An hour ago, I was certain we were all going to die. Now I am staring at proof that somewhere out there, an entire civilization considered our survival important enough to respond with everything it had, all triggered by a single, trembling mistake made by someone who had never expected to matter this much. The docking bay doors grind open with a sound I have never heard them make before, slow and heavy, as if the entire station is holding its breath along with me. Captain Ashcombe stands beside me, his damaged uniform still smoking faintly at the shoulder, waiting for our first face-to-face contact with the fleet that answered my mistaken call. A single shuttle detaches from the main formation outside, small compared to the massive vessels behind it, and glides toward our docking port with a smoothness that feels unnatural after a night filled with violent shaking and explosions. I watch it through the reinforced viewport, my hands still trembling slightly, unable to shake the feeling that everything about tonight has moved far beyond anything I was trained to handle. The shuttle docks without a single bump or jolt, sealing seamlessly against our airlock, as if it had performed this exact maneuver 1,000 times before. The pressure equalizes with barely a whisper of sound, and then the inner doors slide open to reveal 3 figures standing calmly in the corridor beyond. Grace Whitfield steps through first, and I recognize her voice immediately from our earlier transmission, though nothing about her appearance matches what I expected. She looks remarkably ordinary, dressed in a simple dark uniform with minimal markings, her expression calm and professional, the same steady tone from the comms channel now matched by an equally steady presence in person. Behind her walks a taller figure, introduced simply as Owen Pierce, who carries a small medical kit slung over one shoulder and immediately begins scanning the corridor with quiet, practiced efficiency. The third figure, a younger woman named Priya Whitcomb, stays slightly behind the other 2, her attention focused entirely on a handheld device displaying what I assume are structural readings of our damaged station. Captain Ashcombe extends a hand toward Grace Whitfield, and she takes it without hesitation, her grip firm but not aggressive. She thanks him for the clarity of his earlier communication and asks immediately about our casualties, our structural damage, and whether we require medical assistance beyond what our own station can provide. There is no mention of the raiders, no discussion of the scale of the fleet outside, nothing that suggests she considers tonight's response to be anything unusual at all. I stand slightly behind the captain, still trying to process the sheer speed of everything that has happened, when Grace Whitfield turns her attention toward me directly. She asks, with what sounds like genuine curiosity rather than accusation, whether I am the comms officer who sent the original transmission. My throat tightens, and I manage only a small nod in response, bracing myself for whatever reprimand might follow. Instead, she simply thanks me. She tells me that my transmission was clear, properly formatted, and transmitted at exactly the right moment to allow for the fastest possible response. She does not mention my mistake regarding the frequency at all, and for a moment I wonder if she even knows about it, though something in her expression suggests she understands far more than she is choosing to say out loud. Owen Pierce moves past us toward the corridor leading to our medical bay, asking Nadia Voss to guide him to anyone requiring treatment. Nadia hesitates only a second before leading him away, her earlier fear now replaced with a kind of stunned cooperation, as if she too cannot quite believe how calmly these newcomers are handling a situation that nearly destroyed our entire outpost. Priya Whitcomb remains near the airlock, her device still scanning our damaged sections, occasionally murmuring structural assessments to herself. She mentions, almost offhand, that our outer hull integrity has dropped to a concerning level and that a repair team will be dispatched shortly to reinforce the compromised sections before we attempt any further operations. She says this the way someone might mention the weather, with no urgency, no drama, simply a fact to be addressed. Captain Ashcombe leads Grace Whitfield toward the bridge, and I follow closely behind, still struggling to reconcile the calm efficiency of these three visitors with the chaos of the last several hours. Along the way, several of my fellow crew members peer out from side corridors, staring at our visitors with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief, none of them quite ready to process what has just happened to our small, insignificant mining post. On the bridge, Grace Whitfield takes a moment to study our damaged control systems before speaking again. She explains, patiently and without any hint of condescension, more details about the protocol I accidentally triggered. She tells us that the frequency embedded in our old station wiring was originally installed as part of a long-standing agreement between our people and hers, an agreement established generations ago, long before either Captain Ashcombe or I were born. She explains that the agreement was designed to ensure that any station connected to that network could summon immediate, overwhelming assistance in the face of an existential threat, without needing to navigate slow bureaucratic channels or wait for standard regional patrols that might arrive too late. She tells us that the scale of the response is not something that can be adjusted or reduced, that the system is intentionally designed to send everything available rather than risk sending too little. Captain Ashcombe asks the question that has been sitting heavily in my chest since the moment those 300 ships first appeared. He asks her directly what would have happened if the threat we faced had genuinely required a response of that magnitude, if 3 raider ships had actually been the beginning of something far larger and more dangerous. Grace Whitfield's expression shifts slightly, something more serious flickering behind her calm exterior. She tells us that the protocol exists precisely because such situations have happened before, in other parts of known space, long before Kelvin R9 was ever constructed. She does not go into detail, and something in her tone suggests she considers those past events better left undiscussed for now, though the weight of her words makes it clear they were serious enough to justify building an entire failsafe system around preventing them from happening again. I find myself asking, almost without meaning to, how her people managed to arrive so quickly, faster than anything our own scanners or engines could ever hope to achieve. Grace Whitfield glances at me, seeming to consider how much to explain, before telling me simply that her people developed methods of traveling between distant points in space long ago, methods that allow near instantaneous response to genuine emergencies across vast distances. She does not elaborate further, and I sense that this too is a topic she considers beyond the scope of tonight's conversation. Captain Ashcombe asks about the raiders, and Grace Whitfield confirms that all 3 vessels have been secured, their crews taken into custody without incident, and that they will be transferred to the appropriate regional authorities once her fleet completes its assessment of our station's condition. She assures him that our outpost will not be held responsible for the raiders' actions, and that any resources used in the rescue and repair effort tonight are considered part of the standing agreement rather than a debt owed by Kelvin R9. As the conversation continues, I notice something shifting in the atmosphere of the bridge. The initial fear and confusion among my crewmates is slowly being replaced by something closer to careful curiosity. Milo Bennett, still monitoring his sensors, asks quietly whether the ships outside will remain in our system for long, clearly torn between relief at their protection and unease at their sheer overwhelming presence. Grace Whitfield answers that most of the fleet will begin departing within the hour, now that the immediate threat has been fully neutralized, leaving only a small support contingent to assist with repairs and ensure our station remains stable before returning to their previous positions. She says this so casually that it strikes me again just how routine this entire event seems to be for her, despite representing what is easily the single most extraordinary night of my entire life. Owen Pierce returns from the medical bay sometime later, reporting to Grace Whitfield that our injuries were relatively minor compared to what he initially expected, given the level of structural damage to the outpost. He mentions a few crew members with fractures and burns, all of whom he has already treated using equipment far more advanced than anything our own medical bay possesses, equipment that seems to heal injuries in a fraction of the time our own systems would require. As I stand there listening to the steady exchange of information between our captain and these calm, capable visitors, I begin to understand something that unsettles me far more than the raiders ever did. Tonight, in a moment of pure panic, I reached for the fastest possible help I could find, never imagining the true scale of what I was calling upon. I expected a single patrol ship, perhaps two, arriving hours too late to matter. Instead, I summoned an entire civilization's readiness for catastrophe, a fleet built to answer threats far larger than anything our small mining outpost could ever truly face. Grace Whitfield notices my expression and offers a small, understanding smile, as if she has seen this exact reaction many times before from others who accidentally triggered the same protocol. She tells me gently that mistakes made in genuine fear, in the middle of real danger, are never something to be ashamed of, and that the purpose of the system I activated tonight is precisely to remove hesitation from moments when hesitation could cost lives. Her words help ease some of the tightness in my chest, but they do not fully erase the strange, humbling realization settling over me. I called for help expecting a modest rescue. What I received instead was an entire fleet's unwavering, immediate answer, delivered with a calm efficiency that makes me wonder exactly how much more capability lies quietly waiting behind people who consider tonight's response nothing more than routine business. Later that same evening, after most of the fleet has already begun withdrawing from our system, I find myself back in the comms booth, staring at the same console that started all of this. Priya Whitcomb stops by briefly, still holding her small handheld device, and tells me that our hull repairs are ahead of schedule thanks to the support crew she coordinated earlier in the day. She mentions, almost as an afterthought, that she read the initial transmission log herself and found nothing wrong with how I handled the situation, given the circumstances. I ask her, somewhat hesitantly, whether people on her side ever get used to responding to emergencies of this scale so quickly. She considers the question for a moment, then tells me that her people have simply had a great deal of practice preparing for the worst, so that when genuine emergencies do occur, hesitation never becomes the reason someone fails to receive help in time. It is a simple answer, but it stays with me long after she moves on to check the next section of the station. Captain Ashcombe finds me there a while later, quietly reviewing the night's events in my own head, and tells me that regardless of what happens next, regardless of any reports or reviews that may follow, he is grateful I was on duty tonight. His words settle something in me that I did not realize needed settling, and for the first time since the alarms first sounded, I allow myself to breathe a little easier. 3 days after the attack, our station finally receives an official communication from Regional Command, and the tone of the message tells me immediately that news of what happened at Kelvin R9 has already spread far beyond our small corner of space. Captain Ashcombe reads it twice before calling me into his office, his expression unreadable, somewhere between concern and reluctant amusement. He tells me that Regional Command wants a full report explaining exactly how a routine raider attack on a minor mining outpost resulted in the deployment of what they are now calling an unprecedented Allied response. He shows me the message, and I notice the careful, almost nervous wording used by whoever drafted it, clearly unsure how to address a situation their own protocols never anticipated. I ask him what he plans to tell them, and he simply shrugs, telling me the truth is really the only option available. He explains that he has already spoken briefly with Sector Administrator Lena Marchetti, who apparently spent most of yesterday fielding questions from her own superiors about why an entire fleet from a previously unfamiliar civilization appeared in our system without any prior diplomatic notice. Apparently, my accidental use of that old frequency has caused quite a stir well beyond our own small crew. Captain Ashcombe tells me that several neighboring outposts detected the fleet's arrival on long-range sensors before it even reached us, and that reports of hundreds of unknown vessels appearing out of nowhere spread through regional communication channels faster than any official explanation could keep up with. He shows me another message, this one from a nervous supply officer at a nearby station, asking whether Kelvin R9 is under some kind of new protective agreement they were never informed about, and whether other outposts might request similar arrangements if they too are threatened. Captain Ashcombe admits he has no idea how to answer that question, since neither of us fully understands the terms of the old agreement that apparently still exists between our people and the humans. I ask him if he plans to speak with Grace Whitfield again before submitting his report, and he confirms that she has already offered to answer any follow-up questions Regional Command might have, seemingly unbothered by the scrutiny her fleet's actions have brought upon both our peoples. He tells me her calm willingness to explain everything so plainly has actually made Regional Command more suspicious rather than less, since bureaucrats apparently find it difficult to trust an explanation that involves no hidden agenda whatsoever. Later that day, I am called to a formal debriefing alongside Captain Ashcombe, conducted remotely through a secure channel with several unfamiliar officials from Regional Command. They ask me detailed questions about the exact sequence of events leading up to my transmission, wanting to understand precisely how an ordinary comms officer managed to access a frequency that, according to their own records, was supposed to require special authorization codes that Kelvin R9 was never issued. I explain honestly that I never intended to access anything special, that I was simply attempting to reach the standard regional patrol during an active attack and made an error under extreme pressure. One official, a stern voice belonging to someone named Harold Whitby, asks pointedly whether I was aware beforehand of the old agreement's existence. I tell him no, and I can hear the frustration in his voice as he mutters something about outdated station schematics that should have been updated decades ago. Another voice on the call, softer and more measured, belonging to someone named Evelyn Cross, asks a different question entirely. She wants to know how I felt in the moments after realizing the scale of what had responded to my call. I hesitate before answering honestly, telling her that I felt overwhelmed, confused, and deeply uncertain whether I had made things better or catastrophically worse for everyone aboard our station. Evelyn Cross's tone softens further as she tells me that my honesty is appreciated and that similar incidents involving accidental activation of that old frequency have apparently happened before, though rarely on this scale of consequence, since most previous incidents involved much smaller vessels responding rather than an entire mobilized fleet. This detail catches my attention immediately, and I ask her to clarify what she means by rarely on this scale. She explains, carefully choosing her words, that the size of the response appears to correspond somehow to the perceived severity of the threat detected by the automated protocol itself, rather than simply the act of triggering the frequency alone. In other words, something about the raider attack itself, beyond my simple activation of the channel, caused the system to determine that an overwhelming response was necessary, rather than a modest one. Captain Ashcombe leans forward at this point, asking what exactly could have caused 3 raider ships to register as a threat, significant enough to warrant 300 vessels in response. Neither official seems to have a complete answer, though Harold Whitby mentions almost reluctantly that preliminary analysis suggests the raiders involved may have been carrying equipment or connections linking them to a larger, more organized network than initially assumed, something Regional Command is still actively investigating. This revelation sends a chill through me that I was not expecting. The raiders who attacked us, the ones I assumed were simply opportunistic criminals looking for an easy target, may have actually been part of something far larger and more dangerous than anyone on our station originally realized. If that is true, then perhaps my mistaken transmission did not simply overreact to a minor threat, but instead accidentally uncovered a danger that would have gone completely unnoticed otherwise. The debriefing continues for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from technical specifications of the old frequency system to detailed timelines of the fleet's arrival and departure. Throughout the entire conversation, I notice a subtle shift in how the officials speak to me, moving gradually from suspicion towards something closer to grudging respect, as if they are slowly coming to terms with the possibility that my mistake may have actually prevented a far worse outcome than any of us originally understood. After the officials disconnect, Captain Ashcombe remains quiet for a long moment, staring at the now blank screen. He finally tells me that regardless of how this situation unfolds politically, he personally believes I made the right call that night, mistake or not, since our entire crew is alive and our station still stands despite the severity of the attack. His words help settle some of the anxiety that has been building in my chest since the debriefing began. Later that evening, I receive a personal message directly from Grace Whitfield, sent through a private channel rather than official regional command lines. She tells me she heard about my debriefing and wanted to check in personally, since she understands how overwhelming these last few days must have felt for someone experiencing this level of scrutiny for the first time. I ask her directly about the raiders, about the possibility that they were connected to something larger than simple piracy. She confirms, carefully and diplomatically, that her fleet's own scans during the encounter picked up communication signatures suggesting the raiders were indeed linked to a broader organization operating throughout this region of space, one that regional authorities have apparently been trying to track down for quite some time without success. She tells me that my accidental distress call, and the subsequent overwhelming response it triggered, may have inadvertently disrupted operations for that larger organization simply by capturing 3 of their vessels and forcing an unexpected confrontation neither side was fully prepared for. In a strange way, my mistake did not just save our station. It may have dealt a significant blow to a threat that had been quietly growing in the shadows of this sector for longer than any of us realized. This new understanding shifts something inside me, transforming the lingering guilt I felt over accidentally misusing an old, powerful system into something closer to quiet relief. I ask Grace Whitfield whether the old agreement between our peoples will need to be revisited, given everything that has happened, given how unprepared Regional Command clearly was for a response of this scale. She tells me that conversations are already underway at a much higher level than either of us occupies, conversations aimed at ensuring better communication and clearer understanding between our 2 civilizations moving forward, so that future incidents, whether accidental or intentional, can be handled with less confusion and less unnecessary alarm among stations like ours. Before ending our conversation, she offers one final piece of reassurance that stays with me long after our channel closes. She tells me that regardless of how the political situation develops, regardless of any formal reports or lasting scrutiny I might face, the simple truth remains unchanged. On the night everything went wrong, I made a choice under impossible pressure that ultimately protected everyone aboard Kelvin R9, and that outcome matters more than any bureaucratic confusion that followed in its aftermath. Over the following days, word of what happened at our outpost continues to spread further than I ever imagined possible. Milo Bennett shows me a message he received from a cousin stationed at an outpost 2 systems away, asking if the rumors are true, if a mining post really summoned an entire foreign fleet by accident, and somehow came out of it with everyone alive and a criminal network exposed in the process. I do not know how to answer him beyond confirming that yes, somehow, that is exactly what happened. Nadia Voss spends much of her free time fielding similar questions from other engineers across the region, some curious, some skeptical, a few even faintly envious of the attention our small station has suddenly received. She tells me she finds it strange how quickly people seem to forget the sheer terror of that night once the story becomes something told secondhand, polished into an exciting tale, rather than the desperate, frightening scramble it actually was. Captain Ashcombe, for his part, seems more focused on the practical aftermath than the growing attention. He spends long hours coordinating with both regional command and the remaining support contingent from the Seoul Defense Compact, ensuring that our repairs continue smoothly and that our station's daily operations can eventually return to something resembling normal, however unlikely that outcome felt during the chaos of the attack itself. I find myself, in quieter moments, replaying the events of that night over and over, trying to understand exactly how a single moment of panic managed to ripple out into something with consequences this far-reaching. Each time, I arrive at the same conclusion Grace Whitfield offered me. I did not plan any of this. I simply reached for help when I needed it most, and everything that followed grew from that single, honest, desperate choice. 2 weeks after the attack, I am standing in the same docking bay where Grace Whitfield first stepped aboard our station, except this time the atmosphere feels entirely different. Repairs to Kelvin R9 are almost complete, our outer hull reinforced with materials far sturdier than anything we originally had, a quiet gift from the support contingent that remained behind long after the main fleet departed. Captain Ashcombe stands beside me, along with Nadia Voss and Milo Bennett, all of us gathered to witness something none of us ever expected to be part of when we woke up that morning. A formal delegation has arrived, not just from the humans, but also from our own regional government, here to finalize what officials are now calling a renewed cooperation framework between our two civilizations. Sector Administrator Lena Marchetti arrives first, looking far more composed than she did during the frantic days immediately following the attack. She greets Captain Ashcombe warmly, mentioning that the events at Kelvin R9 have become something of a turning point in discussions that apparently stalled for years before finally gaining real momentum. She credits our station, somewhat to my embarrassment, as the unlikely catalyst for renewed diplomatic progress. Grace Whitfield arrives shortly after, accompanied by a slightly larger delegation than her initial visit, including Owen Pierce and Priya Whitcomb once again, along with a new figure introduced as Daniel Foss, apparently a senior coordinator responsible for reviewing the old agreement's terms and updating them to reflect current realities. Daniel Foss carries himself with a quiet, thoughtful demeanor, listening more than he speaks during the initial greetings. The formal proceedings take place in our station's largest conference room, hastily cleaned and rearranged to accommodate the unusual gathering of officials from two civilizations who, until recently, barely acknowledged each other's existence beyond old, dusty agreements buried in forgotten wiring. I am asked to attend as a witness, given my direct role in the events that led to this moment, and I sit quietly near the back, still feeling slightly out of place among so many important figures. Daniel Foss begins by acknowledging the confusion and alarm caused by the fleet's sudden arrival, offering what sounds like a genuine, carefully considered apology on behalf of the Seoul Defense Compact for the lack of clear communication surrounding the old protocol. He explains that the original agreement was established so long ago that many of its specific operational details had simply been forgotten or poorly documented on both sides, leading to exactly the kind of confusion my accidental transmission created. Lena Marchetti responds graciously, acknowledging that regional command bears equal responsibility for failing to properly maintain records regarding the old frequency system, allowing it to remain active and accessible without any updated training or awareness among station personnel like myself. She mentions, somewhat pointedly, that this oversight nearly resulted in unnecessary panic and diplomatic confusion that could have easily been avoided with better maintained documentation. The conversation shifts toward practical solutions, and I listen closely as both sides discuss establishing clearer protocols moving forward. Daniel Foss proposes creating a tiered response system, allowing stations to specify the apparent severity of a threat when activating the old frequency, so that future responses can be scaled more appropriately rather than defaulting immediately to full fleet deployment, regardless of actual circumstances. Grace Whitfield adds that regardless of any new tiered system implemented, the fundamental promise behind the original agreement will remain unchanged. Any station facing a genuine, severe threat will still receive an overwhelming response if truly necessary, ensuring that no outpost like ours is ever left waiting for help that arrives too late. Her words carry a quiet conviction that reminds me of the same calm reassurance she offered me personally during our very first conversation. Captain Ashcombe raises a question that has clearly been weighing on him since the debriefing weeks earlier, asking about the raiders and the larger organization they were apparently connected to. Daniel Foss confirms that joint investigations between regional authorities and the Seoul Defense Compact have already yielded significant results, tracing several additional operations linked to the same network, resulting in multiple successful interventions across neighboring systems over the past 2 weeks alone. This news brings a wave of quiet relief through the room, and I find myself finally understanding the true scope of what my simple mistake set into motion. What began as a moment of pure panic during an unexpected attack has apparently triggered a chain of events leading directly to the disruption of a much larger criminal network that had been operating undetected throughout this entire region of space for years. As the formal proceedings continue, Lena Marchetti turns her attention toward me directly, asking if I would be willing to share my personal account of that night, for the official record being compiled to document this historic renewal of cooperation between our peoples. I feel a flush of nervousness rise in my chest, unaccustomed to this kind of attention, but Captain Ashcombe offers a small, encouraging nod beside me. I stand slowly, my voice unsteady at first, as I begin recounting the events of that chaotic night, the fear I felt as the raiders attacked, the desperate moment when my shaking hands triggered the wrong frequency, and the overwhelming disbelief that followed as an entire fleet arrived to answer a call I never intended to send in that particular way. As I speak, the room remains completely silent, every official listening intently to the honest, unpolished account of a low-ranking comms officer who never imagined becoming part of something this significant. When I finish speaking, Grace Whitfield offers a small, genuine smile, telling the assembled officials that my account perfectly captures why the old agreement matters so deeply, not because of the impressive scale of the fleet's response, but because of the simple, desperate courage required to reach out for help in the middle of genuine danger, regardless of whether the exact protocol used matches perfectly with official expectations. Daniel Foss adds that stories exactly like mine are precisely why renewing and clarifying this agreement matters so much moving forward, ensuring that future comms officers facing similarly desperate moments will have clearer guidance available, while still preserving the fundamental promise that overwhelming help will always be available when truly needed, regardless of any confusion or hesitation caused by outdated documentation. The formal signing of the updated agreement takes place shortly afterward, with Lena Marchetti and Daniel Foss both adding their signatures to a document that will govern cooperation between our two civilizations for generations to come. Captain Ashcombe is asked to sign as well, representing Kelvin R9 specifically, given our station's unexpected role in bringing about this renewed partnership. Almost as an afterthought, I am asked to add my own signature beneath his, acknowledging my personal role in the events that led directly to this historic moment. As the delegation begins preparing to depart later that evening, Grace Whitfield finds a quiet moment to speak with me privately near the same docking bay where we first met weeks earlier. She tells me that she has recommended my name be included in the updated training materials being developed for comms officers across the region, using my honest account of that night as an example of exactly the kind of courage under pressure the new protocols are designed to support and reward rather than punish. I thank her, still slightly overwhelmed by how dramatically my life has changed since that terrifying night, and ask her one final question that has been sitting quietly in my mind since our very first conversation. I ask her whether she believes I truly made the right choice that night, given everything that has happened since, given the political complications, the scrutiny, and the sheer unexpected scale of everything my simple mistake set into motion. Grace Whitfield considers the question for a moment, before answering, her expression thoughtful and sincere. She tells me that the true measure of that night was never about which specific frequency I happened to activate in my panic, but rather about the fact that I reached out for help at all, honestly and desperately, in a moment when giving up or freezing entirely would have been far easier choices to make. She tells me that courage rarely looks perfect or precise in the moment it matters most, and that mine certainly did not need to be either. As her shuttle finally departs, disappearing into the quiet darkness beyond our station, I remain standing near the viewport for a long while, reflecting on everything that has happened since that first terrifying alarm woke me from sleep weeks ago. I think about Captain Ashcomb's steady leadership throughout the crisis, about Nadia Voss and Milo Bennett's quiet courage as they held our station together against impossible odds, and about the strange, unexpected kindness shown by Grace Whitfield and her fellow humans throughout this entire, overwhelming ordeal. I think, too, about the simple truth she left me with, a truth that settles more comfortably in my chest with each passing day since that chaotic night. I did not summon an entire fleet because I understood the full weight of what I was doing. I summoned help because in the middle of genuine fear, faced with an attack that threatened everyone I worked beside, I reached instinctively for whatever assistance might save us, without fully understanding the consequences of that choice. And in the end, that instinctive, imperfect reach for help did far more than simply save our small mining outpost from a group of raiders. It uncovered a hidden threat lurking in the shadows of our region, renewed a fragile partnership between two civilizations that had drifted quietly apart over the years, and reminded everyone involved, from frightened comms officers to seasoned fleet coordinators, that sometimes the most important choices we make are the ones we never fully understand until long after they are already done. I turn away from the viewport at last, ready to return to my ordinary duties aboard Kelvin R9, carrying with me a quiet confidence I never expected to gain from what began as the single most terrifying night of my entire life. Later that night, unable to sleep, I walked the quiet corridors of our newly repaired station, past the reinforced hull sections gifted to us by strangers who became something closer to friends in the span of just a few short weeks. I passed the comms booth where it all began, the old console now updated with proper safeguards and clear labeling, ensuring that whoever sits in my chair next will never face the same confusion I did on that first terrifying night. Nadia Voss finds me there, unable to sleep herself, and we stand together for a while without speaking, simply looking out at the stars beyond our viewport, stars that once again feel calm and distant rather than threatening. She tells me she keeps thinking about how close we all came to losing everything, and how strange it feels that the very mistake which frightened me most that night turned out to be the thing that saved us all. I tell her I have been thinking the same thing, turning it over again and again in my mind, trying to make sense of how something so small, a single wrong sequence of keys pressed in blind panic, could ripple outward into something so much larger than any of us could have predicted. Nadia smiles faintly and tells me that perhaps that is simply how important moments work, arriving disguised as mistakes until enough time passes to reveal their true shape. Captain Ashcombe joins us a short while later, mentioning that he has already received word of a formal commendation being prepared for our entire crew, an honor none of us expected and none of us feel we fully deserve, given how much of that night was shaped by pure chance rather than careful planning. Still, he tells us, perhaps it is exactly moments like this, unplanned and imperfect, that deserve recognition the most, since they remind everyone involved that courage often looks nothing like the polished stories told afterward. As dawn approaches, marked only by the gradual shift of station lighting rather than any true sunrise, I return to my quarters at last, exhausted but strangely at peace. Tomorrow, I will return to my ordinary duties, monitoring routine transmissions, handling minor technical requests, living the same quiet life I lived before that night changed everything. But I will carry with me, always, the knowledge that somewhere out among the stars, an entire civilization once answered a small, frightened voice with everything it had to offer, simply because that is what the promise between our peoples demanded, and because sometimes the smallest mistakes end up mattering more than anyone could have ever imagined.